help women, save lives, and peacefully end abortion where you live.
I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired.
You were serious about that?
Be inspired to change hearts and minds by joining over 1 million volunteers taking part in the global movement happening in your neighborhood.
She says, pray that I can get through this abortion. And I said, oh, no. So she went ahead and went into the abortion clinic. And she just came out. She told us, I'm not going to get the abortion. We just had a baby saved. We had a baby saved in Memphis today. Praise the Lord.
This is the 40 Days for Life podcast with your host, Sean Carney.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today on the 40 Days for Life podcast. I am Sean Carney, the president of 40 Days for Life, and your host for this podcast, which is dedicated to helping you end abortion where you live. We are just weeks after coming back from the historic Dobbs anniversary event. It was awesome. We got great media coverage. If you weren't able to watch the live stream, you can find that online. There was a lot of great stuff that came out of that event. What a great day for our country. And one of the themes that I know I mentioned in my talk, and that was the sentiment of a lot of people that I talked to, and something we've discussed thoroughly on this podcast, is just the divine intervention of this time in history and Planned Parenthood having incompetent leadership, ineffective leadership. I'm not saying that to criticize. I'm just saying it as a fact. Planned Parenthood CEO is just not as talented right now as Cecile Richards was. And they are not very well run, and they did not expect Roe to be overturned. And all of that combines to very, very bad timing for them for the Dobbs case last June. And so we're going to talk about why Planned Parenthood's leadership is ineffective right now, and what that means for the pro-life movement. It's not just us saying, oh, they don't know what they're doing, they're a bunch of idiots, but how that actually impacts your local abortion facility. Because we are going to see, particularly in year 2, when this time last year, we said there are going to be a lot of abortion facilities that closed, and that has happened. But now we're year 2, the knee-jerk reaction has happened. The fire bombings, the ridiculous congressmen and women saying, storm the gates of hell, go get them. Kavanaugh, the guy went to his house, gonna kill him. The Kansas vote, which was such a mess. All that stuff has come and gone, and the sizzle has left the steak for post-Roe. And now we're going to see some real decisions being made. And those decisions will be made by those who lead abortion in the United States of America and throughout the world, and that is the executives at Planned Parenthood. So that is the topic for today's podcast. And joining me on this important topic, a very effective leader, hardly incompetent on any subject out there. You just ask him, and that is Mr. Steve Garland. Steve, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, and I had a very competent 4th of July last week. All the fingers are intact, so thanks be to God.
Well, shame on you. Shame on you. There was no moment where you turned to someone and said, "Hold my beer and watch this."
Well, I'm not saying that did or didn't happen, but it happened with fingers intact.
Okay, well, that's good to know. That's very good to know. Okay, we're going to go through. We're very organized today because we have a very specific topic, but we are going to go through a list for you of why the abortion industry is so incompetent. And let's just get right to it, because one of the things leading up to this is, forget about Roe and Dobbs and Donald Trump and Amy Coney Barrett and all that stuff. The last 20 years for Planned Parenthood have been good in leadership. They've had Cecile Richards, but they've also been bad in scandals. They've had botched abortions. They've had Lila Rose, who's absolutely tortured Planned Parenthood publicly. They've had David Daleiden, who's absolutely humiliated and exposed Planned Parenthood like no other human being in the history of the world has exposed them. They've had, when you look at some of the Lila investigations, the guy's calling, saying, I want my donation to Planned Parenthood to go to abort the black babies. And the lady's like, oh, yeah, great. I mean, they have had scandal after scandal. Now, unfortunately, they had a leader in Cecile Richards who would just somehow put on a nice outfit and do her hair and go out there and smile and lie and just raise money and plow through and somehow keep the ship afloat and growing. Planned Parenthood grew a lot during those years. They closed a lot of locations, but financially, she raised a lot of money, Steve, and she got more money from our corrupt government, which is still going on today, record tax funding for Planned Parenthood on their last report. So all of that has happened, but they're not without scandal. And then we sort of dump on, stumble upon new leaders, their third CEO in 4 years, and now they have Alexis McGill Johnson, and they look up and Roe is overturned.
Yeah, this is something where it's really quite shocking in ways. I think if you were to wake up, say, 8 years ago, July of 2015, things are going great. Cecile's bringing in tons of cash. They've had a pro-abortion administration. It appears as though they're going to get another pro-abortion administration in the 2016 elections. And then it all kind of falls apart. I think it was August. Was it late July? Was it August when the David Daleiden videos dropped? Trump won. The Supreme Court changed. Roe v. Wade was overturned. It's just been one defeat after another. And they haven't managed to respond to any of them well. I mean, they've had multiple CEOs since then. They've had multiple scandals since then. Just things aren't going well. They've got everything going for them. They've got their hands on the levers of all power, from Washington, D.C. to Silicon Valley, from Hollywood to Wall Street. They own it all, and yet they have been so inept in their management that it hasn't benefited them, and we've seen pro-life victory after pro-life victory.
Yeah, and let's just go to number one on our list. And this list is, we're trying to be objective. We're not because they're evil, that's why they're incompetent. That's a given. That there is a lack of virtue, which is number one on our list. But a lot of the things after number one, we're going to get to on a very tangible thing where you can't run Nike or Microsoft or Nestle or any major company by doing certain things that they're doing and by sort of being this lost ship at sea. But with that said, we know what they do. It is not Nestle. It is not as evil as corporate America can be. This is not working for Coca-Cola. Okay, this is not even working for Disney, which is totally corrupt and corrupting our children. But this is a whole new level. You say that you work at Planned Parenthood, all you got to do is ask the Planned Parenthood workers. But there is a total lack of virtue, and that brings on carelessness and recklessness, I would say. They lack temperance, which we see in their representatives saying bizarre things. They lack prudence, certainly, with their decision-making. There's at times, or I would say most of the time, a total lack of, there's an arrogance there. I don't want to say lack of humility. That can be hard to judge sometimes, but there's arrogance for sure that just assumes every woman is clamoring to have an abortion, especially now that Roe was overturned. And they assume a lot about their supporters. And I think in every movement that can be very, very dangerous. It can be dangerous for 40 Days for Life, a pro-life group, a pro-whatever, a Bible study, whatever. When you just assume something about your followers. And they just assume that every abortion supporter wants 8-year-olds to be able to change genders. They assume that everybody loves abortion at 40 weeks and loves infanticide. And Steve, that comes from their number one problem, which has been their problem, which is a lack of virtue. And that leads to a big disconnect even with their own folks.
It's so true because, you mentioned kind of like these aren't necessarily moral judgments that we're placing beyond number one here. But I think even I don't think you need to be a Christian or to be a person of faith to acknowledge Planned Parenthood's lack of virtue. This is an organization that is run by zealots. They are diehards, and they have a lot of blind spots as a result. And that's why we've seen some of their publicity stunts that are completely tone deaf and just haven't worked. I had an abortion t-shirt, as though the women who we meet crying, limping, physically, emotionally, spiritually broken as they leave their abortion appointments, not eager to go advertise it to the world on a t-shirt, but the lack of virtue, prudence, temperance, patience, all of those sorts of things, they rush headlong into things like the t-shirts or at Christmas time. I mean, it would be despicable to use any holiday, any Christian holiday in particular, to promote abortion, but they pick the Christian holiday that's about the birth of a child to celebrate choice on earth Christmas cards. These are things that you don't do if you have virtue. It's regardless of if you're a Christian or not, there are just certain traits that make for a professional. And the people that are running the abortion industry are not acting like professionals.
But then they did abortions on Christmas Eve. I mean, that was a big. Abby Johnson did a great job exposing that, and she talked about, I worked there and we did abortions like on December 23rd, and I was just like, I don't know, just doesn't feel right. The woman every Christmas is going to be reminded of her abortion. There's a total disconnect, but they've used Christmas. They did abortions one time at our facility in College Station on Holy Saturday of Easter weekend. Even if they could care less about Easter, it's just an extended, a long weekend. You have to assume that some of the women you're doing abortions on realize that's Easter and are basically going to have an abortion on Holy Saturday and then go to Easter Sunday church. So I think, and Cecile Richards, that was a weakness for her. One of the dumbest things she ever said, which surprised me when she said it, was, me and my husband, we had an abortion. It just wasn't no big deal. And she said it at the DNC. We've mentioned it before on the podcast. But you're just not going to find a woman who has laid on that table and had an abortion who says it was no big deal. Typically, it's the opposite approach. They stand up and pound on the table and say, you have no idea what I was going through. It was awful. I had to lay on that table. I had an abortion. You've never been in my shoes. All those things. They don't say, no big deal. So that was a little bit of a weakness for her as far as that disconnect. But the lack of virtue is a problem. It's obviously a lack of virtue. All these corporations now have ethics training, It's just like, it's like training on how to like wash the refrigerator in the office, kitchen. But it's like, don't forget your ethics. It's like, not that you should have an ethical life and ethics just flows into everything you do, but that you were like trained on ethics. Like, we're going to train you on this and this, and then, don't forget your ethics. But they obviously don't do that because they don't believe in that, and it makes them really careless. And that somewhat leads to number 2, Steve, and this is a big weakness for them, and that is that many talented people who could work anywhere else usually do, so they don't get the cream of the crop.
Yeah. There's so many places where, think about like whatever someone's dream career is. Like if you are you're Dallas, I'll concede, Sean, if you're the Dallas Cowboys, you can hire whoever you want, because who wouldn't want to go be associated with a brand like that? If you're Google or Facebook, I don't really like either of those companies, but they have their pick of the litter when it comes to hiring, and that's why they've taken over the world in so many fronts. And Planned Parenthood, whether it's because of their lack of virtue or just the nature of what they do, they have eliminated so many people from their potential workforce. I guess they've eliminated them literally by aborting them, but they've eliminated them by people don't want to be associated with the brand. And that's why we've talked with the late Sue Thayer about how uncomfortable it was for her to do things like go grocery shopping. We've had similar conversations with Ramona Trevino and with other abortion workers. How many people just refuse to work there, not just because they're pro-life, but there's a lot of abortion supporters, people who would describe themselves as pro-choice, who also want no part of being associated with Planned Parenthood. And so they're not getting the best and the brightest. They're getting who's willing to show up there. I mean, that's not even just the administrators, but a lot of the doctors are folks who just don't really. Dr. Haywood Robinson has said, a lot of times the abortion industry, it's something goes wrong, you need extra cash, you've got the malpractice suit, and you need to come up with a way to pay your insurance premiums. These are not the best and the brightest that are running the abortion industry.
No, I am cracking up that you brought up the Cowboys because I don't even think I've ever told you about this. But when I was first hired by the Coalition for Life, Mary Lisa and I were married. We had little kids. I had just become the director. This is a couple of years after I was hired. We had already done, I think, the first 40 Days for Life. Yes, we had. And so it's maybe like '06, '07. And I don't think we haven't launched 40 Days for Life nationally. So it must have been '06. And a friend of mine who's an executive was interviewed by Jerry Jones of the Dallas Cowboys, and he was gonna take over all of their marketing department for the Dallas Cowboys. And he called me, sent me a picture of he and Jerry like in the middle of the star on the field. And he had met Bill Parcells because he was the coach back then and all this. And he said, "Hey, I want you to come work for me if I get this job." And I said, which is like the coolest thing in the world. All I can do is imagine, I'm like 24 years old. I'm like, think of how cool those polos are going to be, and I was like, no, I'm really happy in my job. I just started this pro-life, job, and I love it, and I'm so passionate. I could just hear, like, on the other end of the line, like, he knew me well, but he's, like, laughing, like, why did I think I'd get this answer, But it was just funny that you brought up the Cowboys. I will say that you can go to different ministries or whatever, and there are great people that work there. They're all passionate. Some of them maybe could be doing something else. Some of them maybe couldn't. I will say that the pro-life movement, I'll definitely brag on 40 Days for Life, the people working here could be doing other things. I mean, from our legal department to our administrative team to our warehouse, our store efficiency, like all these things. We have been very blessed that God has sent us very talented people. I'm using us as an example, but you can go to any other company. I mean, my cousin got recruited. He's been recruited by many publicly traded companies because he's a huge IT guy. He's been IT for oil companies and IT companies and, all these things. And you can kind of walk around those companies and you just get a sense that it's a go-getter. You got to be talented. You got to be a hard worker. You got to be responsible. You just never get that with the abortion industry. I mean, when you listen to Leroy Carhart interviewed, and then you go listen to Dr. Ben Carson interviewed Leroy Carhart, God rest his soul, all of that, it's just different. And that's why Abby Johnson was a star. She was one of the most talented people. And, of course, she ended up leaving, right? Sue Thayer, leaving. Myra Rodriguez, leaving. They tried to trap Myra by saying, you're an illegal immigrant. We'll turn you in. Eventually that didn't even stop her. She left. She's very talented. She could be doing something else, and thank God, praise God, she is. But the majority of them, like you said, Steve, it went wrong. They're not very talented. They're not number one in their class. They're not number 20 in their class. And it just, the work ethic there is just not there because the talent level is not there. And that leads us to number 3 on our list, Steve. And this is a big problem. And this is where we could pick on government workers. But there's just a sentiment that you're retired on duty at Planned Parenthood and you don't really have to work. And there's not a lot of accountability because of the comfort of the $500 million in tax funding from the feds, and even more so at many of these pro-abortion states.
Yeah, which has escalated now more to the tune of $2/3 of $1 billion of taxpayer revenue. And this is why I think we've seen a lot of abortion facilities close since Roe was overturned, and many just in the last month or so here have closed since perhaps in response to Roe, but in red and blue states alike. But Planned Parenthoods are not predominantly among them. Planned Parenthood locations have been largely able to hold on because they've got that sweet, sweet government cash coming in. They can count on it. Whatever they do a good job from their mind, a bad job, it doesn't matter. There's no accountability. They're going to get 2 things. They're going to get taxpayer funds, and they're going to get fawning positive media coverage. And that is That's not good for us, right? We don't want them to have that. It's a strength for them, but there's a corresponding weakness in that it allows their standards to slip. There's no accountability for a job well done or for a job poorly done. They just do whatever they want with the knowledge that they're going to be able to skate on it. And that, I think, has led their standards to consistently drop and drop and drop.
And no matter where you work, and we're very blessed because we work with very good people. You don't always get to decide who you work with. It's a publicly traded company, but 40 Days for Life people are good people. Everybody's trying to live out their faith. Everybody's obviously pro-life, but we're very fortunate in that, and everybody's working hard, and they're working hard for a great cause and something they believe in. So we have a very great morale. And I think even in addition to that, there just has to be a good work atmosphere and high morale. I think that's very, very important in any organization or company. And it's just hard to inspire somebody on abortion. That's why they rely on us being violent or angry or belligerent toward them, because they use that for motivation. And all the workers have said that. Like, our best days were where they really were mean to us, and then we could kind of bond together and be like, you know what? We are standing up for reproductive health care. But on an average day, when you just let them be and you're out there in front of their abortion facility and they're going to face the reality of what they're doing in your peaceful silence, knowing while you're out there, that bothers them. That's why there have been 251 abortion workers that have left. I mean, because once they have to face the reality of what they're doing, it's not inspiring. It's not positive. I mean, let's think about, Steve, legitimate healthcare areas that would be really heavy, sad environments, but it's still a positive. Oncology.
Yeah, that's why you see like the obituaries where it's like, please make donations to the hospice program. Like, nobody wants to go to hospice, right? Nobody wants a loved one in hospice, but there's such affection because of the loving, caring, concern, and support that was provided through that process.
Yeah. I mean, my brother-in-law was a paramedic for many years. He worked in the ER, and the ER is a hard place to work. ER doctors are great. I know a couple of them. You got to be kind of eccentric to be an ER doctor because it's crazy, right? But that's so positive. I mean, at any other 10 minutes, you could save somebody's life, or you could tell them, hey, you actually didn't have a heart attack, or whatever it is. It's still a positive end goal. And abortion clinics just don't have that. It is not positive. No one wants to be there, including the workers. No abortionist walks in, and the nurse at Planned Parenthood is like, wow, that's Dr. So-and-so. He's famous for doing heart surgery on, Kennedy. It's just, no, they're all abortionists. They don't even want you to know their name, 90% of them. So morale is really down. And when you add on Roe, which a lot of workers left after Roe, and we predicted that, and the former workers predicted that. Beautiful irony that Roe was overturned the weekend of Abby Johnson's conference, where she had all the former workers together. Their conference is on the anniversary, which is great, the pro-women's conference. But it's just, it's a sad, depressing place to work. And then you're out there praying, and then Roe gets overturned, and corporate leaves you out to dry. Totally. Huge disconnect between corporate Planned Parenthood and those who are actually running an abortion facility. And whether you're listening to this or watching us on YouTube, everybody knows in their heart it's different going into a room or a TV interview and talking about abortion and all these sophisticated things, and running an abortion facility in Chicago or LA or Austin or Denver or Memphis, Tennessee. Totally different. Flying abortion doctors in, dealing with opposition, dealing with 40 Days for Life, dealing with pregnancy resource centers. Doesn't matter how liberal your area is, totally different than these executives that make all these talking points. So it's a tremendous weakness for them is morale, no accountability, and just the comfort that tax money provides them, which is why 40 Days for Life is so important in a post-Roe America. because we've got to drive down their abortion numbers, and that will close them even with the tax funding. We do know that. Okay, Steve, number 4. The abortion industry knows it has never been held accountable for its scandals.
Yeah, you mentioned some of them already. Lila Rose, David Daleiden, there's scandal after scandal. The local abortionists are in trouble. They're botching abortions. I've had this horrible story about this abortionist in Florida who was like chasing her kid around with a knife or something like that because she was drunk. These things are commonplace. There was a while back, Sean, where we did a bunch of research on like abortion providers behaving badly. And you might remember I sent you page after page of the most wild stuff that looked like it was out of some kind of trashy movie. And there's never any consequences for it. These investigations take place. There's Medicaid fraud. It's clear. It's documented. And they just seem to kind of skate. It's like the Hunter Biden effect, I suppose. It doesn't matter what you do. You've got friends in high places. You're going to get away with it. And they recognize that. But that also, I think, has allowed them to become lax. The lack of any external standards leads to the lack of any internal standards. Well, okay, so you screwed this up. You botched this abortion. You gave this woman the wrong prescription. It doesn't matter. Whatever happens, happens. Nobody's called to account, and standards slip lower and lower.
Yeah, they really do. And I hate to say this, but I think the average pro-lifer, people can email and complain or say they agree or disagree or whatever, but I feel like they got away with the baby body part scandal in the end. And part of that, you can look at some direct things. Number one, it really exposed them, obviously, and they lost $36 million that year in funding, in 2015. It's mid-July of 2015. And the next year, Donald Trump is in full-blown running for president against Hillary. Okay, one year later, July of 2016. And Cecile Richards goes out, and baby body parts hasn't faded, but kind of faded. And she pivoted, and she just said, I'm going to make Donald Trump Satan. And now the abortionists, they all love Satan because Satan is creating abortion clinics. But this was back when the abortion industry loathed Satan, along with the rest of the planet. And I'm going to raise a fortune. And she did. And they set fundraising records. And that's how they look at it. They look at how much money are we losing because of scandals? Because that's what a scandal does. That's what a scandal does. Donors, in their case, leave, or clients are like, you're going to sell my baby's heart, you sicko? I'm not going there. And that just didn't really happen. I still think it's great that David Daleiden did it and they exposed him and they took a hit. But when you look at the scale of that, I mean, Steve, we got to turn the clock back on that. I mean, hashtag baby body parts was just everywhere. Daleiden was on Fox News every night, and not Fox News like their lower tier show. I think that's when Bill O'Reilly was still on. He was always on O'Reilly. He was on Hannity. He was on just the biggest shows. He was on CNN a lot. I mean, he was everywhere. Cecile Richards was on everywhere, not looking very happy. Just these are highly edited videos, and then he released the full unedited videos. It was awesome. The whole thing was awesome. But I mean, Monday Morning Quarterback, let's look at other scandals where people never really recovered. Let's take Mel Gibson, Steve. So Mel Gibson is the height of Hollywood, right? Everything. He releases The Passion. Let's go. You haven't seen any movies, as we've documented many times, unfortunately, on this podcast. But Mad Max in the 80s, all the Lethal Weapons, and then it's just like he's making like 2 movies a year. Man Without a Face. Forever Young. Great movie, Steve. Have you seen Forever Young?
I have not heard of it.
That's not surprising. I bet a lot of listeners. That's a great family movie, by the way. Great family movie. Forever Young is so good. And it's little young Elijah Wood. So it's just like Frodo before he's Frodo. Forever Young. And then, of course, the blockbusters. Braveheart, Best Director, Best Picture, all that. We Were Soldiers, The Patriot. Just these massive blockbusters. And then The Passion, which is just like he puts up $25 million of his own money. Everybody says he's an idiot. It's in Aramaic. You're going to lose, everything. You're a moron. It makes $27 million on Ash Wednesday. The first day, it goes on to make $600 million worldwide. He's at the height of his career, and he goes and he gets drunk and he starts cursing Jews. And that's the end of blockbuster, popular Mel Gibson can never do any wrong. Mel Gibson. I mean, that was it. He's come back and he's done some stuff. And he's now doing I think he's directing the 5th Lethal Weapon, and he's in it, and he's doing The Resurrection. We don't want to give away the ending of The Resurrection, but that's going to be awesome. So but I mean, it essentially ended he's like top of the world. He's like Tom Hanks and Robert De Niro combined. He was just huge. And that's happened to a number of pop stars or movie stars and Planned Parenthood is like selling baby body parts. And this is why, we share this on the negative side, because this impacts you. This impacts you because I'm sure many of the listeners that happened and they went to their parish or church or school and were like, can you believe this? And people were like, oh, that's really awful. And yeah. But other than being disgusted, did they really take any action? I will say we saw a bump in volunteers. 40 Days for Life did in 2015. But Steve, do you agree with
Big
that?
time.
I mean, I still think, looking back, because this was on our list, that is a testament to Cecile Richards' leadership and a knock on halfway pro-life Americans.
I think so. I'm going to hold me back. I'm not going to bring up the 2017 Republicans in Congress and their failure to defund Planned Parenthood. But that was still
perfect analogy.
It was relatively fresh. It was at that point like, this is setting the stage. The table is set. Even if you don't want to get into the, woman's right to choose, war on women rhetoric, like the selling the baby body parts gave everybody cover to defund Planned Parenthood. They didn't do it. They didn't face any real criminal repercussions. David Daleiden did face the real criminal repercussions. I think it was overall a disappointment. I think it sort of fostered this sort of fatalism where people think, Planned Parenthood is unstoppable. They can't be beat. But I do think it did take a toll on Planned Parenthood. We did see a significant drop in donors at a number of points in the years following. Election year kind of skews that a little bit. But overall, their donations dropped significantly until the Supreme Court turned. So I think it was a mixed bag, but it was not what it ought to have been. I think that Cecile Richards was a big part of navigating that. But also, I think we can't understate that Cecile Richards headed for the exit not long after that. She was going to leave after Hillary Clinton was elected president. That never happened, so she stayed on, another year or so. But maybe if it weren't for David Daleiden, maybe we'd still have Cecile Richards like running the ship there, and they would have had a much more effective response to Roe. So I think it's hard to say exactly, how do we put a metric on how successful that was. I don't know, but I think overall it's a net positive for us, but a missed opportunity at the same time.
That is one of the most articulate, brilliant statements I've ever heard you say my entire life. And it's totally accurate. And that's the David Daleiden victory. Like that's on the David Daleiden, he's got a list of like these great things that he did to expose the abortion industry. But number one, his like MVP finals moment is he got rid of Cecile Richards. And he got rid of her with that. I think he wore her out. I think she endured it. She's like, Hillary will get in, and then we'll get some rest, and we'll start to take off. Our funding will go up. And then when Donald Trump got elected, they had kind of a weird year that first year where basically she just raised money saying he's evil. And she realized, I don't think this is going to go too well. She also realized how corrupt Planned Parenthood was, and she was tired of answering for it. And she could just go and write a book and enter politics and do whatever she wanted to do and give speeches. And that's what she decided to do. They begged her to stay, but she didn't. But David Daleiden got rid of Cecile Richards. It's an amazing accomplishment. And Steve's brilliant point that he just made, which I never thought of, which is it would be, I'm so glad she's not there at this moment. I'm so glad. Obviously, we don't want her to be an effective CEO, but I think it's divine intervention, which I believe in, as you know, Steve. And that she's not there during a moment when they really need leadership when Roe was overturned. So great point, Steve Carlin. And thank you, David DeLeiden, who we see often. Okay. Number 5 on our list. Just let me do a quick recap since we're kind of halfway. Okay, the number 1, here we go. This is why abortion industry leadership is so incompetent and why it matters. Number 1, lack of virtue. Number 2, many talented people don't want to work for the abortion industry, especially now. Number 3, Planned Parenthood knows it can rely on government money and positive press coverage, and so they're not accountable. They're very lazy, retired on duty. Number 4, the abortion industry knows it is never held accountable for its scandals, which is unfortunately true. And now, number 5, this is another fat and happy thing. Planned Parenthood has no competition on the national level.
Yeah, competition breeds, it's an incentive for performance, right? If you are competing against other great candidates for the job, you've got to strive, and then Planned Parenthood has to get better, and you kind of have this cycle where things just improvement building upon improvement. I think we've seen a lot of that in the pro-life movement, which has become so much more professional and so much better organized than it's ever been before. Planned Parenthood has the exact opposite problem. Lack of competition does make you lazy, and this isn't just a Planned Parenthood issue. There's no competitor, like none of the local abortion chain sort of wannabe Planned Parenthoods have gotten much traction. There's a big chain in California called Family Planning Associates, but they're kind of limited to California. And then you've got, the Whole Woman's Health abortion chain, which they're also wannabes, but they've never really quite taken off at the level I think they expected. They've closed a lot of their facilities. They don't have the resources to compete for talented staff, and then Planned Parenthood doesn't have a need to compete for talented staff because they have a virtual monopoly, and it lowers the standards in the independent abortion facilities and the big abortion chains.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, Whole Women's Health is just, they're tiny compared to Planned Parenthood, and they're big for an abortion chain. It's interesting. I have found, especially with Whole Women's Health, I don't know if it's like the little brother syndrome that Planned Parenthood has with Whole Women's Health. But do you notice, Steve, when there's a big lawsuit that Planned Parenthood wants to push through, they won't do it. They prop up Whole Women's Health. They always did it in Texas. They've done it in other states where there's an abortion lawsuit that Planned Parenthood obviously really wants to win, but they themselves won't be the plaintiff. And so they get Whole Women's Health to do it. I always thought that was, I don't know. It's like if Michael Jordan had a scandal or something, he'd always like send Scottie Pippen out to do the press or something. I'm trying to think of an analogy.
It's my kind of analogy, Sean.
Yeah, I knew you would like that. We haven't done any 90s basketball references in too long on this podcast. But that's what
Who's Rodman,
how I
then?
feel. Oh, yeah. It would have been Rodman. And Jordan wasn't going to address Rodman's scandals. But we can't get on this topic. It'll never end. Did you see The Last Dance?
No.
I saw half of it. It's
I missed
awesome.
it, but
it's awesome. Anyways, sorry for the Michael Jordan detour.
I'll put it on the list next to Terminator 2 and the other films I haven't seen.
Did you watch Independence Day over the Independence Day holiday? Have you seen Independence Day yet?
I'm outside all. Oh yeah, back when it was new.
Oh yeah, you can't. But you saw it in the theater.
I think I was rented it from the grocery store when VHS rentals were a thing.
Yeah. Okay. So you've seen Independence Day. That's great. That's great. Otherwise, you're anti-American. Although I think these days we may need to do an alien podcast, Steve. I've really changed my view on aliens over the years. Not like whether they exist or not. I guess I don't really care. But I'm hopeful if they do. They're always depicted like they're going to come and blow us up and kill us. And we may deserve that. I don't know. That's up to God. But, we've got cultural issues. Maybe the aliens can just give us some basic common sense. Like the boy aliens don't think they're a girl alien. Maybe aliens stay married longer.
or they saw the dog like bridal dresses and decided we're just not going to invade this planet.
That is totally my theory, and was the theory of the great Catholic writer Walker Piercy, who we have referenced many times, a very famous author. In one of his books, he has a scenario where the aliens simply have observed us. They've observed how we treat our women, and they have decided they don't want to come to Earth and live with us. So,
Deuces, I'm out.
Yeah. That book is Lost in the Cosmos. That is a very short part of it that is towards the end, but it's great. Some great lines in there. You'll find yourself laughing out loud. It's a satire for those of you who are maybe getting perturbed with that. Okay. What number are we on? Here we go. All right, number 6. The abortion industry's national leadership, I touched on this a little bit, is disconnected from the day-to-day operations of their local abortion facilities. And Steve, we've said it enough. The late, great Sue Thayer said it. Ramona Trevino says it. Abby says it. Abby, the Planned Parenthood in College Station was in a bidding war with the little old rinky-dink Coalition for Life for the building next door to them because they didn't want us that close. And we had this wonderful woman who will remain nameless who just was so angry that the realtor had gone to Planned Parenthood. But Planned Parenthood was doing all this bidding, and Abby would have had to run this building, and she had no idea it was happening. It was all Planned Parenthood in New York. It's all Planned Parenthood in New York. And they ended up not getting it because we had a little talk with the realtor, and basically, anyways, he decided not to sell it to them. But when Abby converted, I said, yeah, remember that whole property dispute with Planned Parenthood getting into a bidding war with us? And she's like, what are you talking about? She had no clue, as the director of her local facility, that Planned Parenthood in New York was trying to buy the property next to her clinic that they could then have her run. And in the meantime, made the whole community mad because they were trying to expand. And that really opened my eyes for the first time. But Steve, it goes on all the time that they're like, get over it. Who cares about 40 Days for Life? Get over it. Who cares about the pregnancy resource centers? And that is hard when you're running an abortion facility.
It really is. And I think it fuels all of these other things. That disconnect fuels why they can't recruit talent, especially at the local level. I think it fuels the lowering standards. It fuels the scandals. There's just so many different ways in which we have seen unprofessional work product out of a multi-billion-dollar industry that it blows your mind. And people aren't talking to each other. We would not want to pursue that in the pro-life movement, right? At 40 Days for Life, that's why we have our post-Roe symposium, so we can have the headquarters 40 Days for Life team in touch with, learning from, sharing with the local leaders. That's why we're doing workshops all across North America as well as internationally. Nobody knows more about an abortion facility than the pro-lifers who are the eyes and the ears out on the sidewalk in front of it, the 40 Days for Life vigil participants. They know more about it in many cases than the Planned Parenthood national leadership does, and that's why we're at such an advantage.
Absolutely, especially an advantage in post-Roe world. Your local 40 Days for Life leader knows the local abortion industry in your town better than anybody else in your town. They also know the weather better than anybody else in your town. And Planned Parenthood corporate could care less about either one. Okay, the last one on our list. Many local abortion facilities staffers are unqualified for their job duties. And this goes into a recent phenomenon where basically they just want people to speak Spanish because they're so obsessed with this eugenics thing. If you can speak Spanish, you can work there because they want to abort all the minorities, as we've covered in depth on the podcast. First line, when they overturn Roe, where are these poor Latino and black women going to go to get their abortions? And you're just sitting here going, are you aware of the ongoing racial tensions in the United States of America? Like, I don't think you can talk like that. But they do it. They do it. And then those disabled babies, they really got to go. So that's kind of been the recent trend since Roe was overturned. Do you speak Spanish? Yes. All right, you're hired. They're also getting non-medical people to do medical things. like IVs, and I mean, Sue talked about that all the time. They're like training her to help with webcam abortions. She's like, I'm a manager. I don't do anything like medical related. So,
can you draw blood? Just stick the needle in. It's not that hard.
It's not a big deal. It's like turning on the Nintendo. I don't know. It doesn't seem like the same thing. So, yeah, that's a big issue, and that goes into the reason earlier with they're not drawing the talented people, but even above that, they're just saying, just get in here and work, and we'll have you do whatever. There's high turnover at Planned Parenthood. That goes without saying, but we need to say it. There's very high turnover. That's a huge advantage for the pro-life movement. But the standards to work there are low and getting lower. So, okay, let me review those, and then we'll go quickly over how the bad leadership makes a difference for us and for where you live. So, number one, there's a lack of virtue. Number two, many talented people don't want to work in the abortion industry. Number three, Planned Parenthood knows it can rely on government money and positive press coverage rather than performance. Number four, the abortion industry knows that it is never held accountable for its scandals. Number five, Planned Parenthood doesn't have enough competition. It doesn't have any competition on the national level. Number six, the abortion industry's national leadership is disconnected from the day-to-day experience of local leadership. It's a big problem. Number seven, many local abortion facility staffers are unqualified to do their job duties, which gets them in legal trouble. Okay, so Steve, how bad leadership makes a difference where you live? Number one, super weak local response to Dobbs.
Yeah, this is something that has been a great and joyful surprise to me. Here in Wisconsin, we're one of those states where I think if there were a referendum, I think the abortion industry would win pretty handily on keeping abortion legal. If we lost in Kansas, we would lose the same vote in Wisconsin for sure. And yet, they haven't really been able to push back that much. We've had abortion against the law in the state of Wisconsin now for more than a year since Roe was overturned. And if you would have asked me, I would have thought the local Planned Parenthood, as well as NARAL and all of the other organizations, there'd be, daily or at least weekly rallies at the Capitol, and the pro-life legislators would have to be bussed in secret. We had situations like that here in Wisconsin in the last 15 years where it was unsafe to be a legislator because of the progressive harassment, and they're nowhere to be seen. Planned Parenthood leadership might as well be on a milk carton because you never find them. There's not rallies. There's not a response. I guess there's a lawsuit going on, but they just have there's no coordination whatsoever in response to this. You had the big you opened by talking about the big turnout that we had at National Celebrate Life Day on June 24th. It's hard to get a good turnout for events when you're winning. People react when they're having to go against something. And yet they've got every reason in the world in the abortion industry to be mobilizing, and they still can't manage to do it. And it all is a direct line to their poor leadership.
Yeah, it's a great point. On a positive where you see a huge response to a negative, look at the Dodgers, which we're going to cover in another podcast. But so true. It's so true. Something horrible happens and people come out. David Daleiden definitely helped us.
And we exploit this then with we've got the grassroots presence. And so, part of this is why they have bad leadership and why it matters. And here's why it matters is we have, they talk about like air superiority in a war, like who has controls of the skies. Well, we've got control of the grassroots right now. It's like 100% grassroots activism on the pro-life side. And we need to exploit that and take advantage. And the politics flows downstream from the culture. We're making some massive cultural inroads right now just through the presence on the streets.
And Planned Parenthood is just having extreme mission drift all around. I mean, the transgender thing, there's just not as much money in that as abortion when you look at their numbers over time. Maybe everybody's going to go and just start chopping themselves to pieces, but I think that they are absolutely overestimating that. But it's big. I was on their website earlier today. And I was looking for one of their abortion facilities, and all it was like, do you need a sex change? All this stuff. And I'm like, how do I get an abortion? I thought y'all did this. Yeah, yeah. And I did not sign up, Steve, for the sex change, just for the record.
Good, good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm good. I'm happy about where I'm at. Number 3 advantage of where we live, where you live, the listener, the abortion industry is still scandal ridden. And I mean, we're the eyes and ears. 40 Days for Life volunteers are great. You are great at, if you see something or hear something, say something. And we get a lot of reports of minors having abortion where there's parental consent. I mean, we just get a lot of reports, and there's still a ton of scandals. And by the way, you know, as we've always said, we're after the hearts and minds of those who work in the abortion industry, and the abortion workers are not monsters. They see these scandals too, and it wears on them. I mean, that's why we've helped 251 of them have a conversion. So just know, I think one of the most beautiful things that can happen during a 40 Days for Life campaign is when either a 40 Days for Life participant or local leader realizes, oh, Sally, who I thought hated me, is an ally and maybe even a potential friend. And that happens. It's usually the beginning of an abortion worker converting. And that's why their scandals post-Roe are even more powerful, and we need to be there. And the last one, Steve, is, this is new, and we've done some comical podcasts on this. Planned Parenthood's content just went to the toilet in professionalism and sophistication. It's just...
Yeah, it's really ridiculous. We saw the sidewalk, the clinic escort training guide, and it was just poor program. I think at the time we said it looks like it was done at 4:45 on a Friday afternoon. It was lousy. Yeah, every now and then we see the videos that they come out with their sex ed training, and it's low quality. It's embarrassing. It's something that nobody should really want to have their name associated with.
It's just odd. I know one of their training documents, we laughed that it looked like one of our 6 or 7 year olds wrote it. And they're good 6 and 7 year old writers, but it's like they're not going to write an official document on training. It's just kind of weird. It's bizarre. I don't think they know what to say. I've been saying that for a year. I don't think they know what to do. We've been saying that for a long time in a post-Roe world, and we're seeing that. It's very reactionary, and it's not for us. It's not for us. We have all the momentum. And Steve, I know in a couple of weeks we're going to welcome 500 of our local leaders and volunteers to our largest symposium ever, the Post-Roe Symposium. It will be in a couple of weeks in Orlando. And one of the speakers
sold out.
Is sold out, baby. But one of our speakers is the retired Navy SEAL who's a buddy of mine. He did 14 deployments. He was 26 years as a Navy SEAL serving our country. Great Catholic pro-life man. He now leads the security team, Steve, for his local Catholic school when they go to the March for Life in D.C. And I've always gotten the feeling those kids were safe with him leading the security team to go to the March for Life. But Jerry's going to speak to us, and one of the things I talked to him the other day, he's going to hit on is owning this victory and using the momentum and not sitting back, which we haven't done, but also knowing this is a positive. And momentum leads to more momentum. And we just have to remember that. We have to know how to win. We have to trust God. And we have to be aware of what the other side is doing, what they're doing well and what they're not doing well, which we've talked about on this podcast. But also know that we just have to move forward. And we can't get tired. We got to keep going. And there's just so much good going on in the pro-life movement. We have so much momentum, and by the grace of God, we will make states abortion-free over time and our country abortion-free over time. So just to review the quick how bad leadership makes a difference where you live, weak local response to post-Dobbs, for sure. They had no idea what to do at the local level. Total mission drift post-Dobbs. Scandals post-Dobbs, which hurts morale even more. And the just bad professionalism, poor content, and just sort of this lost world that they've entered and everything they've put out since the overturning of Roe versus Wade.
I think there's a lot of opportunities for us here. This is not, as you said at the beginning, this is not meant for us to just pick on Planned Parenthood, as fun as that might be from time to time, but we're sharing this information. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you end abortion where you live. And when you're aware of just what we're up against, it's not quite as scary. It's not quite as intimidating. And we know what to look for. We know what is going on inside that building, behind those closed doors, that the workers are not as fearsome as they might appear to be. The corporate giant is one that's ready to be felled. And I'm really enthusiastic about all of this because I think it just makes an impact in giving us confidence on the sidewalk. Sometimes we go out there and it feels like, maybe you're standing in front of this mega Planned Parenthood and gosh, how can we ever go up against, but it's a paper giant in every sense of that word, paper tiger. And there's so much that we can do just through our prayers, our presence, and our refusal to give up.
It's so true. And, we have the symposium coming up. Steve's been doing all these regional workshops. We've trained a record number of leaders this summer. We've spent a lot of money investing in our leaders because that's the best investment we can make in a post-Roe America. And we're set to have one of the largest, if not the largest, once again, 40 Days for Life campaigns ever coming up this fall. And so keep the momentum going. Please pray for us. Pray for the symposium and the safety of it and the training and everything that we're going to do. We're going to be joined by Abby Johnson. We're going to be joined by, I mentioned Jerry Schick, the former Navy SEAL. We're going to be joined by Mark Houck at the symposium. He is opening us up Friday night. So it's going to be a great time. Please pray for our leaders. It's so important. Leading a 40 Days for Life is extremely hard. It's extremely rewarding, and it's beautiful, but it's difficult. And so many have said the symposium keeps them going and makes their campaigns better to save more lives and to close more abortion facilities. So please rate, review, share this podcast. Give us your positive and negative feedback, please, on any of the things we discussed on this episode or another. And email us that feedback at podcast@40daysforlife.com, podcast@40daysforlife.com. And we will see you next time. God bless you.